welcome. If you're just joining us, you're here for our Ask Me Anything Candid Conversations on Suicide event. And we will just give maybe one more minute for some folks to come in to the meeting, and then we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Fiona Potter. I'm a librarian at the Redwood City Library, and we're really honored to be hosting these speakers this afternoon. And if you are, oh, go ahead. And,
I just want to say thank you all for coming and giving us your support and your loving ears.
Yeah, thank you everyone for being here. And okay, it looks like we should go ahead and get started now. So once again, thank you so much for being here today. And I will introduce our speakers in just a moment, but let's see, I'm also gonna talk a little bit about, you know, resources that you can reach out to if you find this conversation triggers anything for you or for people in your life. You know, there are these organizations that you can reach out to if you are in a crisis. It's the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 1-800-273-TALK. Or in the local area, if you're joining us in San Mateo County, you can reach the county's own crisis line directly at 650-579-0350. And I'm also going to put in the chat when I'm not talking some other resources you can use to follow up, but please just be mindful of your own feelings while we are talking today. And then a really brief Zoom overview again. If you're new to Zoom, you can mute and unmute your audio, or I'm sorry, you cannot unmute your audio, but you can use the raise hand feature to ask to unmute to ask a question out loud. You can also put questions in the chat, and I will be moderating that to the 3 presenters. And
can I mention?
Yeah, go ahead.
The raise hand feature is under the reactions icon at the bottom of your screen to your right. Under reactions, you click on that and you see raise hand option and you click on that.
Right, so the very far right at the bottom next to the closed caption. And thank you, John. I'm gonna let in some more people. And yeah, you can use the chat feature to pose any questions to the panelists, and I will moderate them. This event is being recorded, so keep that in mind if you want to have your video on or off, whatever your comfort is. And then there are automatic closed captions in Zoom that are generated by a little robot. So if those would help you, you can also turn those on and off as well. And then we wanted to talk a little bit about ways to keep the discussion respectful for everyone. And panelists, feel free to chime in if you'd like to say anything else about this. But above all, you know, please be respectful. Please be respectful of the speakers and also the other audience members. We'd like you to refrain from religious condemnation and to use phrases like when you tried to kill yourself or when someone committed suicide, because these are very stigmatizing, and also to avoid asking specifics about the act itself. We'd prefer if you use the phrases mental challenges or struggles versus mental illness. And then again, you know, please be kind to yourself. So if you need to take a break from the presentation, it is Zoom, so please take a break and then come back when you're ready. I don't know if the panelists had anything else to add or clarify about that. Okie dokie. So,
yeah, thank you, Fiona.
So again, we're so happy to have our 3 panelists with us today. They're all part of the Lived Experience Academy in San Mateo County to help behavioral health care system. And I'm gonna actually introduce you when you're speaking, but I will introduce you all together. I mean, I'm gonna read your bio before you speak, but I will say right now that our panelists are John Butler, Pamela Ward Pius, and William E. And so today we're going to hear from each panelist individually about their story, and then we are going to have time at the end, probably a lot of time, about half an hour or more, for those for any questions that you have. So you're welcome to put questions in the chat while people are talking, and I'll take notes and relay those questions to our panel at
And
the end.
can I
Go
just
ahead.
mention, I'd like to introduce my cat Frenchie. She's here
Oh,
next
yeah.
to me watching the event along with my cat Abby. So just so you know who that is, that's Frenchie.
Is Frenchie the one in the picture?
Yeah, that's Frenchie.
Okay. Awesome.
She's a survivor too. She survived an auto accident. So
Yeah, that's a great picture of both of you together. Yeah. So, oh my goodness. I think I just did not write down the order of the speakers, but I think we're starting with William. So I'm going to read William's bio first. Okay. Okay. I'm going to spotlight you for everyone. So William is a longtime San Mateo County resident. He has been involved in the mental health community in the county for about 4 years, and he is very active in suicide prevention as a crisis line telephone counselor and a member of the Suicide Prevention Committee. He is also an outspoken opponent of mental health stigma and speaks publicly through the county's Lived Experience Academy and Heart and Soul Seen Through Stigma program. We're so happy to have William with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Fiona. Do I sound okay? Great. Well, I'm really excited to be here today, and I'm really glad to see how many participants that we have. You know, this is a topic that's very near and dear to me and that I'm very comfortable talking about. So we did lay down our ground rules, but I'll probably caution you, I'm more likely to trigger you than you are to trigger me. My name is William, and I'm like Fiona was saying, I'm a longtime San Mateo County resident. I'm a father, a husband, a brother, a retiree, and I'm also a suicide survivor in both senses of the word, or the phrase, and somebody who's grappled with mental health and self-medication most of my life. And, you know, I kind of want to start off way back in the beginning because we have a little bit of time today, and how these things kind of all worked together and turned into what ended up being the journey of my life, which was kind of a long and arduous one. You know, my first memories, even as a small child, I remember being anxious and feeling apart from other people and not connected, and probably experiencing what would now be called depression, certainly insomnia. And then when I was 6 years old, I got very ill. I had encephalitis and meningitis, and they're both pretty serious diseases, and they're mosquito-borne. I was in Florida, and that's how I got them. And I was, you know, really ill and out of school for months. And finally, when I was ready to go back, I'll never forget what my mother told me. She said, when you get back to school, tell everybody you had meningitis, because that's a disease of the spine. But don't ever tell anybody you had encephalitis, because that's a disease of the brain. And you don't ever want anyone to know that there's something wrong with your brain. So this was drilled into me from that young of an age. And, you know, and of course I had the kind of supportive siblings that many of us had. My sister would say things like, yeah, you know, if they ever find out what you're like, they're going to give you electric shocks or cut out a piece of your brain. I remember when I was 8 years old, we were at the movie Planet of the Apes. And if you ever saw the original, there's a scene where Charlton Heston finds his friend captured and he has the big scar on his forehead. And my sister nudged me and said, that's what they're going to do to you. So this is the kind of world that I was raised in. and obviously there was stuff going on in my household. I wasn't the only one who was different, but when I was 12 years old, I finally found what was a solution for a lot of people in those days, and that was alcohol. I started drinking, and it was amazing. When I drank, I was like other people. I could relax, I could talk, I could relate, I could do all these other things. And that was kind of the mantra in my generation, for anything that might now be called mental illness: hide it and self-medicate. So, I did this, and I was still the same person that I always was during the day, very driven, very focused, very much motivated by fear, competition, resentment, and all of these things, but determined to survive, determined to be successful. And then I was a very different person on weekends or in the evenings when I would drink and do other things, because it would, change the way I could relate to people. I had two very different sets of friends, lived a very bifurcated life, and this carried on through my life. When I got into college, I still was on this kind of dual track. And, by the time I was a freshman in college, I'd already been drinking like a college student for my whole high school years. And, so I fell right in. And, as somebody who needed to be careful about self-medicating, I just picked an environment where, I'd be real safe. Berkeley in the 70s. So, talk about throwing gas on the fire. So, I went on like that, got out, and I was in the working world, and, it was still in the go out and drink after work thing. And, I was able to do that. I was able to do it quite well. It was actually very helpful to me because I could outdrink my coworkers and stuff. And, I lived like this. And, I was constantly driven by this feeling that, I knew there was something wrong with me, but I always thought the next thing would fix it. If I can just get this diploma, if I can just get this degree, if I can just get this job, if I can just get this raise, if I can just get this promotion, if I can just buy a house, if I can just get married, if I just have a kid, the next thing was always going to do it. The next thing was always what was going to fix me and take away this stuff going on inside of me that drove me to, be who I was and act the way that I was. And of course, that's what I wanted because, in those days, mental health stigma was downright weaponized. This is in the days before HIPAA. And if you went to a psychiatrist or a mental health professional, somebody in personnel, which is now called human resources, would tell somebody who would tell somebody who would tell somebody, and then it was a career buster. Oh, wow, he's got mental problems. He can't work with money. He can't work with people. He can't, that was just the way things were. They've really improved a lot since those days, but that's how it was. So I went along like that, and I kept building and building my life basically on a very fragile foundation. And I kept accumulating and gathering and finding things and finding the next thing and never finding that thing that would change. And I finally reached a point where I built and overbuilt, and it all came crashing down at once. I was going to be losing my job of 28 years. A very important relationship had ended. My family had all ostracized me. And even drinking and such wasn't working anymore to relieve the pain. And at that point, I just had enough, and I made a decision to kill myself. And this didn't come in isolation. All my life, that suicidal ideation had been there, and it had always been kind of a line in the sand. I wasn't the happiest person in the world because I didn't fit in that well in a lot of different ways. Everything from having difficulty forming relationships and all the things that comes with that, to being just not being on a regular 24-hour cycle and having to get up early when that didn't agree with me and doing it every day. So, I always say, I can only tolerate so much of this. If things get this bad, if they go past this point, I'm just going to kill myself. And, this was the time where this all came together, and I made the decision to actually do it. And at the same time, I certainly didn't have mental health professionals or anyone to reach out to, and nobody was answering their phone. So this all ended up happening in a quite isolated situation. Well, I won't get into the details because we promised we wouldn't, but there's still a couple of paramedics out there scratching their heads. They can't figure out why I'm still alive after what was called a series of credible attempts. And you can, for those of you who are familiar with these things, you'll know what happened then. I ended up on a 5150 and then a 5250, and only got out of the hospital because I was willing to go into an intensive outpatient program and allow myself to be heavily medicated and all this other stuff. And, that's kind of the pattern that you go into. And then I spent 9 months in a sober living house after that. So from the point where I decided to try and kill myself, or the cycle of events that started that, to when I was actually, back to living what would be a sort of normal lifestyle, was about a year, just to go through this whole process. So, what happened in that year? Well, I came to understand what I now call my three-legged stool of recovery. And it comes down to three things: willingness, humility, and service. And where I first started learning about this was in the intensive outpatient program. One of my treatment coordinator, they weren't getting through to me, and they were giving me medications, and it was just like a big experimentation thing. And as a self-medicator, all right, you want to give me this? I'll take that. Oh, you want to give me that? I'll take that. I didn't care. And so they were just trying to basically diagnose me based on how I reacted to certain medications. So it was like, okay. Well, then she said, you know what, I don't think that this all fits you. I think you're an alcoholic, and I think you should read this book. And I was like, oh, come on. I'm not an alcoholic. I've been drinking since I was 12 years old. My whole family drinks more than I do. I could outdrink anybody in this program. There's no way I'm an alcoholic. So I ended up reading the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. She got me to read 164 pages, and it wasn't what I expected. There was a lot of stuff in there about, not so much stuff about drinking, but there was a lot in there about causes and conditions and states of mind and the way that people think and react to the world. And this book was like 80 years old at the time, and I'm reading it and going, uh-oh, this makes more sense than what the doctors are telling me. So I got out. I ended up getting involved in that in a program around that, which was very helpful to me. And I started also coming out of this programming of not being willing to accept help. And that's where the willingness comes in. There was a time where I never would have been willing to read that book. I never would have been willing to take the medication. I never would have been willing to listen to a mental health provider. I never would have been able to take direction from another man called a sponsor or something like that. And, I guess I had finally hit bottom to the point where I was able to do that. And I was willing. To, okay, you know what? I'll take that medication for now. Okay, I'll talk to this doctor. Okay, I'll listen to this doctor. Okay, I'll listen to this person. Okay, I'll do these things, these 12 things you want me to do in this program. And it changed everything. Being willing was very different than living through this life of stigma and pushing back and not being willing to cooperate. And, a big thing that came out of that too was the concept of humility. And I can honestly say, before all this happened, and I'm just past 7 years clean and sober now. So it's about 7 years since any sort of incidents. And so that gives you an idea of the timeline. But, before that, if someone had asked me about humility, I would have said, I don't think I'm better than anybody. That's why I work so hard. That's why I compete so much, because I'm not better than anybody. That's why I have to keep up, Well, that's not humility. That's an inferiority complex. Humility is about understanding that I'm only a cog in the wheel, that I'm just part of God's world, that there's a role for me and I need to play that role, and that, it's not about me. I'm not the center of the universe. It's about not being self-centered. It's about not, always putting yourself first. It's about being a part of, being connected in a very general way. And one of the things that comes out of that almost naturally is this concept of service. And service is very important to me. For those of you who've been in the NAMI Connections group that I host, I always say, I help myself by helping others. And I don't say that facetiously. It really is true. I get more satisfaction out of helping other people now than I got out of all that stuff I used to do, whether it was chasing money or building things or competing at work, or you know what, it really is about helping other people. And that's what gives me peace and comfort and ease in this world and relief. And it's led me to some very interesting things. I've gone from somebody who 7 years ago tried to kill himself to somebody who spent the last 4 years as a telephone counselor on the suicide crisis hotline. And it's the one that you see in the background of my my background here. It's over down there in the corner. And, that work has been very important to me. Being on the other end of it, I have a certain empathy for the callers that I think some of the more clinical people maybe don't. And some of the callers pick up on that. And, I've helped many people get through the day. And that's really all we can do. I'm not going to fix anybody there, but we need to get through the day. And, I've also done work with the National Alliance of Mental Illness locally, working on their warm line, and also doing connections groups, which if you've never heard of, there's online support groups that actually work quite well. And, with Heart and Soul, Seeing Through Stigma, where I speak very similarly to this, with a little bit more emphasis on stigma, a little less emphasis on suicide. And, as part of Mental Health Month and Suicide Prevention Month and all these things, I think it's very important to do what we're doing today and get this message out and have these conversations. The first thing they teach us on the suicide hotline is, if somebody calls, ask them if they're thinking about killing themselves, because what you're doing is you're sending the message that it's okay to talk to me about that. And that's the message that we want to send here today. It's okay to talk about that, and we're here to talk about it. And, I welcome your questions and your comments and any feedback that you may have. And thank you for being here. And thanks you, so many of you, for being here.
Thank you so much, William, for sharing that really powerful story. And anyone who has a question for William, you're welcome to put it in the chat, and I'm going to hold questions until the end. And I'm going to give William a break from being in the spotlight. Yes. Okay. And I'm going to bring up the lovely Pam. So Pamela Ward-Pius is a community activist and public speaker on living with mental health challenges and finding recovery. She's a person with lived experience and a former employee of BHRS in the Office of Diversity and Equity. She served our county, San Mateo County, in a variety of capacities, including being past chair and present co-chair of the African American Community Initiative. And in addition to that, she's also a former instructor at City College of San Francisco. We're so happy to have you with us today, Pam, and the floor is now yours. I will make it possible for you to unmute yourself. Just 1 second. Okay. Sorry about that.
It was me. I couldn't unmute myself.
It's always me. Thank you. Sorry about that. Welcome so much, Pam. The floor is yours.
Okay. Before I listen to someone speak in a public forum, I prefer to have an idea of who the speaker is. It may be apparent that I'm an African-American woman. What is not obvious that I'm a woman who survived childhood physical and emotional abuse by my mother. Now, sometimes when I say physical abuse by my mother, people say, oh, she spanked you. Well, no, she didn't spank me, she beat me. And her emotional abuse was verbal and very harsh. I became pregnant at age 16 by a heroin addict, looking for love in all the wrong places. I'm a single mother of 3 adult children, 2 by birth and 1 by love only, a grandmother and a great-grandmother. As a young woman, I tirelessly served the community as a comrade in the Black Panther Party for 7 years. After leaving the party, I earned an AA degree in social behavior with honors, a bachelor's degree in child development with honors, a master's degree in education, administration, and policy analysis, and studied as a doctoral candidate at Stanford University. Now, at Stanford is where I first had my first depression. I considered it a situational depression because of all the pressure I was under as a single mom and a doctoral candidate. What I found later was that it was not a situational depression because it happened again and again and again. I suffered 20 years of chronic debilitating depression, hospitalizations, and survived a serious suicide attempt. The pain of a suicidal clinical depression caused me to lose touch with reality and how precious life is. Severe emotional and mental anguish overcame me, and my thought processes were not rational. I began writing letters to my family members, identifying things that I wanted to be given away to certain family members and friends. And unconscious of life-giving breath, I just wanted to end the all-consuming pain that I felt that overwhelmed me. And I thought I found an answer. For me, death equaled peace. I could stop feeling this. It was a physical pain that I felt in depression. This is not an uncommon mindset among people who attempt suicide. My heart was totally disconnected from my feelings. During the act, there was no sadness or shedding of tears. And I won't go over the act itself, but I found myself unconscious, and I either had a spiritual experience or a delusion. I entered a brightly lit tunnel and encountered a man I believed to be my grandfather only because of the hat he was wearing. Compelled to go toward the light, the man told me that I wouldn't be allowed. He said that my work was not done yet and I had to go back to my life. Well, at first I was very disappointed. And even when I woke up, when I awoke, to say the least, it was a messy affair, which did serious damage to my stomach. I realized that if it's not your time to transition from this life, a suicide attempt can leave you alive, but with serious medical problems. Clinical depression, a major reason for suicide attempts, can be managed, not cured. I couldn't avoid the next incidence of clinical depression, but the outcome was totally different. I do want to say one thing. I did go to the emergency one night after I'd been in bed about a month. And this was before my suicide attempt. I told the psychiatrist that I was depressed. I was dirty, disheveled, my hair wasn't combed. And he said to me, "What's the matter, honey? You lost your man or your job?" Well, I didn't know if this was stigma related to mental health issues, misogyny, or some kind of racial slur he was saying. But I do know that he made me feel invisible. He made me feel as though, even though I came there for help, I was going to be marginalized. And I ended up that time in the hospital for a month. But after that, I couldn't avoid the next incident of clinical depression, but the outcome was totally different. Now, I'm not proselytizing to anyone, but I pray to God to help me. And that's just my way. I've been a spiritual person all my life. I've studied, I was a Methodist as a child. I studied Hinduism for 7 years. And I attend Glide Church now. And I thought to myself, if God would help me, I would do everything in my power to help myself and change my life. Now, my prayers were answered and I kept my promise. After my last hospitalization 9 years ago, I immediately enrolled in a day treatment program to understand where the first experiences of sadness and self-loathing came from. I became aware that my depression was a combination of genetics. Several people in my family have depression, and they refuse to take medication and they refuse to seek therapy, and they suffer. And so I realized that part of it was the physical and emotional abuse I experienced as a child. Revisiting these issues was painful, but in the end, I experienced an awakening. I found my voice and spiritual grounding again after 20 years of despair. My recovery had begun. Though I still take medication for depression and anxiety, I insist on partnering with my psychiatrist to determine the right type and level of medication so I can stop feeling like a zombie. I was over-medicated for many years and had no energy, no enthusiasm about life that I'd had in the past. And I also was fortunate enough to find a loving, giving therapist who I continue to see weekly. She's a Russian woman open to my life experiences as an African-American woman with mental health challenges and abuse issues. Though I would have preferred to have an African-American therapist who understands my culture, my therapist now, she's open to my life. So it's not as though she has preconceived notions. She's first generation American, Russian. So she doesn't have some of the feelings about African Americans that people who grew up in this country do. I joined Glide's church ensemble, which continues to be my pure joy. St. Augustine says that singing is like praying twice. Reminiscent of my happy memories of my childhood in the church choir. But at Glide, we sing gospel music, which has its roots in the souls of Black folks, their struggles and triumphs. Glide reflects my roots and wings. I joined Glide's prayer circle, praying over the prayers of the congregation to honor and thank God. For I'm a child of God, and despite hard times, I've been blessed immensely. This year, I was honored to be the primary speaker during Glide's Sunday celebration to share my story of recovery. And this honor is usually reserved for people in the ministry. I consider my work at Glide a ministry in the prayer circle, and also my service work that I do. For 5 years, I volunteered at San Mateo General Hospital in the Lock Psych Ward to bring a message of hope. I facilitate an encouragement support group at Glide Church and tell my story of mental health challenges and recovery in community forums with behavioral health, lived experience workshop, Heart and Soul Seen Through Stigma. I've served on the Voices of Recovery Board of Directors, as well as Heart and Soul's Board of Directors. To honor my community service, I was inducted into San Mateo's Mental Health Recovery Hall of Fame and received the Tony Hoffman Mental Health Services Award. Today, I consider myself a woman of God who is grateful for my ethnic heritage, being a woman, my family, my church community, and recovery community. Generous with my time and glad to be alive, I consider myself to be full of humor, light, and love. After many years of being single and content, last year I got married for the first time on November 28th. And I'm 67 years old now. So that was a long time being single. I didn't think I would ever get married, but I guess it was just time. It was a time in my life where I met someone I felt that I could live with for the rest of my life. So though depression may come again, I believe I've become the woman I was waiting for. And I'll never stop fighting for what's right with the support of my community and loved ones. I'll never lose faith. Thank you for listening to my lived experience of suicide and my path to recovery.
Thank you so much, Pam, for sharing that. It was beautiful. I'm seeing some heart reactions from the crowd, which I also feel. Thank you so much. So thank you. So again, we're going to have time for questions at the end. So feel free to put questions for Pam in the chat now if you want to, or you can ask them later. And I will give Pam a break from the spotlight and move it over to our final speaker, who really brought this whole event together for us today. It's John Butler, who some of you may know. And I'm so happy to be able to work with John again on another event. We worked on an event last year as well for Mental Health Awareness Month. So John is a peer and longtime resident in Menlo Park. He has been active in mental health care as an advocate for those who suffer. He is a Lived Experience Academy graduate and co-facilitator. And in 2020, John was one of the recipients of the George Couloirs Consumer Hall of Fame Award. And John keeps up his self-care through his cats, through comic books, and through Pete's Coffee. And he might even have some cats around him now, maybe. Yep. Yeah, so thank you again so much, John, for bringing this event together today, and the floor is yours to share about your experience.
Thanks so much, Fiona. Fiona was great. We did an event previously with Fiona on friendship and mental health, and other ladies. I think it's Fiona and Lana Jean's idea together created friendship bracelets. We were all supposed to do it together, but I never got to mine. I'm not very good with my hands. But I want to note that I put in the chat NamiSanMateo.org and HeartandSoulInc.org, two of the groups that William mentioned. They have support groups each week, a couple times a week. And also I put in the link to the Suicide Prevention Month, the other events that are available on the county website. You can just click on that and you'll go right there, and there are registration links and descriptions and a lot of good stuff there. And I want to say I resonate with what William has shared. Humility and service are very critical to my life. I like to be an authentic, genuine person with people I know, my friends. I believe my mental health, San Mateo County mental health community is a spiritual family in one sense, although I go to church also. And I believe in service. I'm also active in various forms of service with NAMI, and I'm joining a Heart and Soul People of Color support group. And very soon I look forward to that. I was involved briefly in the White Advocates group. I think it's called a WAG. I'm sorry, with Glide Memorial Church that Pam referred me to, and a white anti-racist group. That's it. Yes. And so I am also part of the African American Community Initiative, which Pam is the co-chair, along with Lee Harrison, who has meant a lot to my life, has led me to the results where that I live in today. And I also want to say I resonate with Pam in saying sadness and self-loathing was very much my lifetime career. And I also resonate with her singing is like praying twice. I love that St. Augustine quote. Thank you for sharing that. My youth, like Pam's, was raised based in spirituality. I was born and raised Catholic, went through the survived 12 years of Catholic school. So, and today I am still reunited in Catholic activities, although I also participate in St. Raymond's Church in Menlo Park, New Community Church, and Menlo Church in Menlo Park, because I need all the spirituality I can get. Although my mind is not fixed on Christianity, I am open to any practice, any faith, and I'd love to have dialogue on spirituality with anyone. My Catholic experience overall, I was not assaulted by a priest or a nun, so you may find that unbelievable because that's what everybody hears about. That's the only thing people hear about the Catholic Church. It was a great experience. And my mother, I'm the third of 4 generations of people with mental health challenges. My grandmother, my mother's mother, was in what we used to call an asylum in Maine. My mother was, from what I know from my relatives, manic depressive. Although the majority of the time I found her very loving. She used to ask me to read the Bible in the kitchen while she was working. I experienced very little other than the extreme arguments between my mother and father, which was a lot of yelling and cursing and slamming doors and things like that. I did not experience, I did not recall her manic depressive behavior, although relatives tell me it was very real. So my household, our Catholic Church participation was very comforting for me. Although my household was, I mentioned swearing and slamming doors and yelling and things like that. To me, I was a very sensitive child, and it was very emotionally abusive. And traumatic is an understatement for what I experienced. That word is used too much that it seems to have lost its true meaning. It's a very painful thing, which actually led to what Pam refers to as sadness and self-loathing. My experiences in childhood led to a lifetime of that. Comic books were my escape. I would go down to the bedroom I shared with my father and open the door to the San Francisco cold air and listen to the sound of a freeway that was less than a quarter mile away, what we call the San Jose Freeway, read my comic books, and it was very soothing. It gave me the hope of escaping, gave me the hope of a superhero, a Jesus figure, a savior figure that would take me away from what I was experiencing. I was led to, my father was not a drinker. I had a brother named Gary I loved very much, who was, and he was the best, most charming, beautiful member of my family. Among all my brothers, he was the one that was beautiful physically and just amazing with people. I model some of my life today after what Gary was like. Tragically, he died in an alcohol-related accident when I was 21. He was 36. My father also was killed in an alcohol-related accident with 2 white teenagers who were drunk driving in very expensive and big cars, hit my father's Volkswagen Beetle, if you remember what those look like, and fortunately he was instantly killed. I saw my brother Gary took me to the wrecking yard, and we observed the condition of the car that he was in, and I don't know how a human being even fit in that car. They had to use the jaws of life to get in and remove him. My daughter also died in an accident, auto accident, although it was not alcohol or substance abuse related. It was just a simple accident, misjudgment in driving by her mom. She died in 1994. And my life is made up a lot of tragedy and loss. I have 7 family members, including my daughter and my parents, who I was unable to say goodbye to. And if you look at I'll put the link in the chat, our mental health graphic novel, which we created together in 2019, you'll see it begins with 7 gravestones and their loss. My little girl's was, I gotta say, the hardest. I keep 2 of my favorite pictures of her on my apartment door. And she would have been 40 years old, February 27th of this year. That is the bulk of my mental health challenges, struggles really, not just challenges, was the loss. My career in drinking was very supportive in helping me to medicate for those losses. And I went through periods of definitely lifestyle actions that I did not respect today in my behavior towards women and even to agree that my behavior towards my daughter was not ideal. I'm not proud of the father that I was most of the time. So substance abuse and alcohol were easy things in the grocery clerk industry where I worked the majority of my life. And it was losing that job, that quote unquote career, the union called it, that was the trigger to my suicide attempt, my first suicide attempt. It was, I found the Valium I needed through coworkers in the grocery industry, and vodka was a drink of choice that I inherited from my first wife's parents and their stepfather. So it was simply a long time of, I was in a Christian marriage, although we lost our intimacy very quickly into the marriage. I got involved in working 2 jobs to get out of my grocery clerk career, which I was embarrassed by. And so I found myself having been fired one afternoon, drinking alcohol and consuming Valium. I don't know at what rate, I don't recall. I called my brother Larry, who had been my closest brother in my childhood. Even Gary wasn't the same, although I loved him very much. Larry was my therapist, my counselor, my friend, my true brother. And so I called him without saying what I was doing. I was saying goodbye. And he fortunately called the Redwood City Police Department. Ironically, I was living not far from the mental health clinic in Redwood City, where I've attended for over 30 years now. I was in that neighborhood, and he called, and I got to say the police were very good to me. The ambulance driver was very good to me. The psychiatric ward experience at San Mateo County General was a damn nightmare. It was, if you can picture the old 1950s black and white films about madness and psychiatric asylums, it was totally that for me. And being on the ward with people talking to themselves and yelling spontaneously and things like that, all of it. My wife was very distressed. I did not know how to explain what was happening to her. And she could not, I don't think she coped with it well. She, a couple months later after my suicide experience, I came home at 3 in the morning and my apartment was emptied. And I called her mother, my mother-in-law, hysterically yelling at 3 in the morning about what the hell happened. I did not expect that at all. Although I learned to forgive her, I blamed her for a long time, but I learned that I could not tell her what was happening with me, and she could not understand it. And the Christian psychiatrist we saw together that sided with me tried to explain my issues to my wife. She was not able to accept that. That was the bulk of the important part of my past. I encountered through my behavioral health and recovery services clinic in Redwood City. I was introduced to a peer counselor in 2010, and there's a story behind what peer counselors are and what they can do. I am in part today. We help our peers define recovery. And this peer counselor, who I will name, is Mr. Lee Harrison, who is now back at South County, the mental health clinic in Redwood City, behavioral health. Fortunately, I'm glad that he's back there. He did a lot of good work for the Office of Consumer and Family Affairs, who are responsible for the Lived Experience Academy, which is another long story, basically teaching us to tell our stories and to be able to do what I'm able to do now, which is tell my story in public. And I am very proud to be with Pam and William today. They are outstanding peers in our community. And I'm very, their stories shine to me. I do not feel that I can compare to what they have to say in their delivery. And I just do my best. I tell my truth. I'm a real person. I'm genuine with people. I love to meet new people. I approach people in cafes, strike up conversations. In everything I do, if you could see my t-shirt here, choose life, choose love. It's a suicide prevention t-shirt. Everything I do, I believe I'm obligated as a recovering mental health person to speak the truth, to tell others, to spread the word. That's why this event is here today. That's why we do these things together. We speak our truth and we reach out to others. And I hope today there are those of you here in our meeting who are in need, are searching for what we were searching for. And I hope you find it today in our stories. And I thank you so much for being here. There's a lot of names I don't recognize. You are welcome, and we are grateful you are here. And there's a lot of community members that are supporting us. Thank you so much for being here for us and for supporting us. And Fiona, I'm very grateful that you took us on. It was a short notice thing, and I'm very grateful for the Redwood City Library for all that they're doing for us today. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, John. Gonna pull it together. So I will bring up the 3 panelists, but first unmute them. Because it's hard to do afterward. Okay, so thank you so much again, John and William and Pam, for sharing your very, very moving stories. And we, the panelists, have come up with some questions to ask ourselves, to ask each other, but anyone in the audience today, you're also welcome to pose any questions. You can, again, use that raise hand feature from the reactions at the bottom of your screen, or you can type something in the chat for us. And I'm also going to put our event survey in the chat just because I know some folks might need to leave us at 4:30. That happens sometimes, but this event will continue until 5. So I'm going to put that in the chat really quick before I forget, and also give everyone a little bit of time to think about their questions. And I don't know if any of the panelists also had any other thoughts to share with each other before we start doing our questions. Yes, John, did I make you not unmutable? Oops.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to mention, if we're answering a question and you have a question that comes from that, please raise your hand and we'll address it right then, if that helps you at all. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to ask the first question from our list of prepared questions, which is, did you question your decision once you had a plan to commit suicide? Anyone can answer.
I'd like to start with that. A few years back, I was with Sylvia Tang, who was here, and William was in the audience at an event at the Redwood City Library in their upstairs room. And we shared our stories. I was with 2 really lovely young women. I was grateful to be on that team. Someone in the audience, this makes me think of that, this question, said to me, yeah, I appreciate your story. I understand you've lived with these thoughts for a long time. But what was it that day that led you to make the decision to attempt suicide? And needless to say, I was not so far along in my public speaking at that time, and it really shook me. And I appreciate that afterwards, Islam from Star Vista came up and spent time with me, saw that I was troubled. But suicide for me, I have to admit, I think I was in part being selfish. Sometimes people say that about us, that we're being selfish. And in part it was because I had so much ongoing pain that came to a climax that I did not think of anyone else. I did not think of my 7-year-old daughter that I would be leaving. I was not very close to my family of birth at the time, so I did not think of them. I knew that the people I worked with were just a bunch of drunks and addicts and people that really were fairly unfeeling. There were some rare exceptions to that, but my lifestyle with them was not admirable. And so it was an impulse. It was the truth that this is the time, this is the day. Let's do it now. And I gotta tell you, I was crying feverishly. I was just consuming the alcohol and Valium, vodka and Valium, and I just let the process happen. You know, that's just what it was like for me. Oh, Pam needs to be unmuted. Oh.
For me, I was in so much pain. As I said, it felt like physical pain, that I was not in touch with reality. I just thought if I could get rid of this pain, then I'll be all right. And somehow the idea of suicide came into my mind. And once it came into my mind, I obsessed on it until I tried it. So there was it wasn't that I didn't think about my family. I didn't think about anything except this idea of peace. I want to be at peace. I don't want to be feel this sadness and remorse anymore. I just wanted it to all go away. Thank you.
Well, this is interesting because it turned, we were in three very different places. You know, for me, I'd had these thoughts all my life to some extent, but one of the biggest factors was that, you know, I actually felt like I had become a burden, a negative impact on the lives of the people around me, particularly my family. And, you know, my mental health provider tells me that that's one of the three main factors for people who actually make the transition from thinking about killing themselves to doing it or trying to do it. And, you know, it's very much, in a way, a cultural thing in that, you know, if you're a man and you're not going to have a job and you're going to be a burden on other people and you're going to not be able to lead and support and uplift your family, then they're better off without you. You know, you're doing them a favor by killing themselves, by killing yourself. And so, you know, it was really in a situation, you know, and I was being ostracized by everybody around me, and I was angry at them and angry at the world and angry at myself. And, you know, that all culminated in that moment.
One other thought, since Pam and I have expressed spiritual thinking, another thing that I've been asked by Christians before is, because I was living, going to church, I guess I'm not living the Christian life necessarily, but going to church, there's a difference. How could you, you know, because people say commit suicide like as if it were a sin, and that's the old thinking of the church, is that it, you know, you damn your soul and so on, which is not true. But my experience too was also that when I think about God, I think about, in my belief, someone that laid down their life for me. And I do not know any other human being that loves me that much that would do that for me. So I want to go home and be with God. He or she, you know, however you want to refer to God. God has no sex, so that doesn't make any sense. But I just wanted to be with the one that loved me, and nobody else would ever love me that much. So that was my thinking in that way too.
One thing, yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
In terms of what John was just talking about, one of the things that I confronted myself with before I attempted this was that, you know, one great possibility is that, you know, I'm definitely not going to a better place. This could just be oblivion. And if I'm not willing to accept that, then don't do this, you know, and yet I still did it. And, you know, my views have changed since then in terms of how I view God and the universe, and a belief that the universe wastes nothing. Everything gets recycled, including the life energy. But at that time, you know, I had that thought process of, if you're not willing to accept oblivion, don't do this.
Thank you, Wayne.
Thank you. Thank you all. I'm going to read a question from the chat from the audience. And it's from Linda. What advice would you give to family members who are trying to help their loved one get help, but they are refusing to go to the ER, to a therapist?
Can I answer that one?
Sure.
After my suicide attempt, it was actually my sister, my mother, and well, both my sisters and my mother came to my house. I did not go to the hospital immediately after my suicide attempt. They came to my house, and my older sister asked me, "Did you try to take your life?" And I answered yes. And I was so relieved that she asked me the question straightforward. She just asked me the question and I could answer yes. And I knew then that I had walked through a door that I would never be able to walk backwards again. And from there, I went to the hospital. The emergency physician said he didn't even know why I was alive, because of what I had done. And I knew that I really hadn't felt support from my family before, but that particular day, I felt they surrounded me in a way that allowed me to tell my truth, that I tried to hurt myself.
That's good. Pam brings that up. That's one of the questions that people think a lot. If I ask someone, do you want to kill yourself, that'll put thoughts in their mind. But the thing is, it actually helps you open up to say what you are going through. So it's a good thing. Not like you just blurt it out, but I mean, you develop in a dialogue and a conversation, and you show that you care, and then you know, it's good to do that. So thank you, Pam.
Yeah, and this is a great question. It goes right into the wheelhouse of my story about recovery. And what was the first word that I used? Willingness. You know, I was willing to accept help, regardless of where it came from. Well, not regardless of where it came from, but from various sources. This is people who really need help, but are refusing to get it, are extremely difficult for themselves and their families. It's not. If I had the answer to that question, I'd be the best telephone counselor in the world. But I don't. You know, there's stages of change, and you kind of have to figure out where people are in them. There's different approaches to this. In the 12-step programs, we take a very harsh approach to it. You know, if somebody comes in and they're, you know, well, I don't believe in all this, and I think I need to do that, the message is, well, then go out and do that. And if you survive, come back. You know, but that's not something family members can tell each other. One piece of quote unquote advice I could give is, you know, as the family member, you're probably not the best person to try and convince this person that they need to get help or how to get it, because there's too much of an interpersonal dynamic and too much of a power structure within the family. But, you know, as a suicide crisis hotline telephone counselor, I would love to talk to that person. And as, you know, a third party and somebody on the outside, I might be able to convince them of getting help more, but maybe not. And it's just, it's a tragic and painful reality of life that, and a lot of times the willingness to change only comes out of hitting a very low bottom. And, you know, you could tell from my story that I had to hit a very low bottom in order to be able to make a change.
I would add something, and that is, when I was teaching at City College of San Francisco, I had a student walk in one day. And while class was going on, she walked up to me and she said, "I'm going to commit suicide." Well, certainly in this particular arena, I was not expecting that kind of reaction from anybody. And it was after my suicide attempt that she asked me this question. So I had her call the suicide hotline. I asked her to check in with me during that weekend to make sure she was all right, and to stay in contact with the suicide hotline if she had any other feelings that she was going to hurt herself. So I just remembered that. I forgot that memory.
Thank you all. Thank you for responding to that question. And we're actually getting a lot more questions, so I'm gonna try and get through more. I have a comment, which is, thank you to all the panelists for sharing such familiar stories. I believe you help others discover or find language to what they have felt. It's such a great place to start in this journey, especially if they seek help and hope. So thank you all so much. Positive affirmation. I have a question. This goes back to faith. Maybe I'll ask both the questions together. So one is it your faith that gives you strength to carry on? Would there have been anything that could have prevented you from your attempts? And then, do you think that religion or God is the only way to avoid thinking about one hurting oneself?
Well, yeah,
That
go
might
ahead.
have been 3 questions.
Yeah, I was going to try to grab them all. I
That
could
was a
still remember
lot.
all 3.
Thank
I
you
can
for
only
your
speak
patience.
for myself. I can't say what the answer is for other people. For some people, it will be some other reason. But for me, the spiritual reason was the one that helped me not to make that decision again, and to change my life to one of I had been a person of service, as I said, in the Black Panther Party for 7 years. And so to continue that service was very familiar to me. And it made me feel as though I was useful in the world. And what was the next part of your question? Fiona?
Yes. Do you think that religion or God is the only way to avoid thinking about hurting oneself?
No, I don't. I think each person will find their own path.
Yeah, and I would second that. It's not the only path. And, you know, I've talked in my work, I've talked to a lot of people who are suicide survivors and have found other things. You know, sometimes they're just in a bad moment. Sometimes, you know, it's just an overwhelming feeling and something happens. Sometimes the circumstances of their life that they thought were so bad, and this especially happens with young people, you know, the circumstances that they think are so bad are really things that they could overcome and can overcome, especially if they start getting help and start listening to other people and start doing things differently. You know, for me, the faith question is interesting because I kind of had to flip the whole thing on its head. One of the most interesting things I ever heard in one of these meetings that I go to is a woman said, I went through my whole life thinking it was about my list for God, but all along it had been about God's list for me. And, you know, we're taught as children to, you know, pray for these things that we want. Well, that's not praying to God, that's praying to Santa Claus. You know, I pray for God's will for me and the power to carry that out. And that prayer gets answered. It's answered here today. One person mentioned the word hope. And if our speaking made one person in this room feel hope or learn something about this, you know, then that is God working through us. But no, there's many paths out of this, many, many paths.
Thank you, Stella, for your hearts. Appreciate that.
And I have a question from someone who says that their son has attempted suicide twice, and they wanted to know whether you had, the people on the panel, had you tried once or had you had other attempts?
I only tried once, but I would say to the person who is has a family member who's attempted, get some support for yourself. Try NAMI, try therapy. You can't change anybody else, but you can support yourself, and you can be a model of what it's like to live in this skin, this human skin that we're in. And I would say that's the best way to be an example of living love, is to care, is self-care for oneself, not telling someone what they shouldn't do.
This is a more complex question than you'd think, because, in terms of a documentable suicide attempt, once was enough for me. But as I look back over my life before that, with the drinking and risky behaviors and some of the just really inadvisable things that I did, in moments as well as over periods of time, just how much of that was some sort of an attempt to kill myself.
I want to point out too, we talk about getting support. Getting a therapist can be really damn hard. So there are 2 links I put if you scroll up in the chat for heartandsoulinc, heartandsoulinc.org and namisamateo.org. They both have support groups every week, a couple times a week. You're really welcome to attend those. You'll find genuine people, and you'll find that your hopes can be met there by being with peers like us that know what it's like. And Pam has to leave early, so I want to give her all the advantage. But thank you for bringing that up. You're the kind of person we are here to speak to, and thank you so much for bringing that up and being personal like that. Fiona?
Thank you, everyone. And I just wanted to get the link for the group that Pam is going to. Just one moment. So Pam does have to leave us a little bit early today, and it's because she's going to another event called Real Talk. And this is the topic of conversation is suicide awareness in the BIPOC community. So this is also a Zoom event that starts at 5, and I'm putting the link in the chat. Anyone else is welcome to.
Yes, that's with the Mental Health Association of San Francisco. You should look them up. Their resources, they've got a lot of really good resources too.
Yes, please look them up. And then I have another question that maybe Pam could address first if she would like to, but it's a long question, so I'm going to read it. So this person says, I work in youth substance abuse services. Is there any advice you have for organizations serving youth in mental health, substance abuse prevention, and other community programs? Any advice for supporting youth? Thank you for being here and sharing your stories today. It's greatly appreciated. And I know, Pam, that you had shared well, I don't know how old your student was that you were working with at City College, but
They were an adult.
Okay.
But I have worked with youth, and probably one of the most precious things I own is a plaque from San Mateo that says, to Pam Ward for being there when the youth, yes, with an S, of San Mateo needed her, of North Central San Mateo needed her. I think that young people need to know that they are loved. They need to know that they are loved, that they are special. We do this with babies, but we forget when they get older, they need the same thing. They need to know how special they are. They need to know what gifts we think they bring into this world, what gifts they will bring into the world, what we feel are our prayers for them for the future. And my belief is that if we show them how special they are, how wonderful they are, that they will know that their life has purpose and that they won't feel that taking their life is an option.
We also recommend starvista.org. I think it's simply that.
Yeah. Starvista has a lot of
They
programs.
work with youth and families. They've been very supportive. And I want to say that the links we share are not just resources to throw at you, but there's real people there, and those real people are stepping stones into the San Mateo County mental health community. And I would say there are many people, like I mentioned, I feel it's a spiritual experience for me. That means connecting and genuine love, and we speak our truth together. And so you're welcome to come and join us. Please come and join us.
A couple of things on the youth thing, and this comes out of my experience on the line mostly. Talk to these kids about life and death, you know, especially ones who are using hard drugs. You know, as dangerous as they were in my day, you know, now that fentanyl is out there, and that next line of meth, that next line of coke, that first shoot up could be the last. And, you know, young people don't get it sometimes. They see people coming back to life on television and in the comic books and stuff, and they think that that happens. You know, they need to know that they're messing with life and death. And then the second thing that's important for youth to understand in a very real way is their life will probably not turn out the way that they anticipate that it would when they're 16 or 17 years old. It's going to be very different than what they anticipate. And because that's life. And their life probably is not going to turn out the way that their parents want it to either. You know, some of them are going to be doctors, but most of them aren't. Some of them are going to be professional athletes, but most of them aren't. And that's okay. It's okay that their life is their life. It's okay that they're not necessarily meeting their parents' goal. It's okay that they got to be on one paper, because it's not the end of the world, and it may be the starting of a new path. And, you know, these are the roots of the suicidal thoughts that I'm encountering in young people on the crisis line. You know, it's life, you know, you take it as it comes and do what you can. And, you know, the fact that you're working with kids who are experimenting with drugs and using drugs, they're trying to escape the same kinds of feelings that I was. And look where that ended. So, you know, what are you really doing if you're 16 years old and doing meth? You don't need the extra energy. You're playing a very dangerous game of roulette with your life. And, you know, why?
I just want to say, I need to leave. Yeah. So I just need to say thank you to everyone who came today. I see some familiar faces and some new faces. Hi, Ami. Thank you for your note today. I felt that. Just thank you for coming. Thank you for being open to listening to our stories. And every time I give one of these talks, I learn something about other people, but I also learn something about myself. And so again, I thank you, and I'm going to sign off now. Bye.
Thank you so much, Pam. Bye.
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 Thanks, Pam. Bye-bye. I want to bring up one of the questions Pam or William thought of it. It was basically, what would you say if you could go back to your suicide attempt what would the person you are today say to the person you were then? And I think of that because of this conversation that just came up. But for me, it's like I never knew I would have a purpose like the purpose I have today. I never imagined that. And that is because of peers like William, like Lee Harrison, people like Sylvia Tang and Christy Liu that are here. People are just real, you know, and I was so, we just need to find a way to reach the people that are now where we were. And that's why we do this. That's why we're here. And you can find a purpose. You can find a life beyond the misery and pain and just all the shit you're going through. There is something beyond that. Fight, just fight and keep going. That's what you need to do.
For me, that's a very interesting question, which is one reason that I came up with it, because it's an incredibly complex double-edged sword. If I were to go back 7 years and tell the person who was trying to kill himself, don't do it. You're going to be retired and sitting in a room talking into a computer about suicide and trying to help people and blah, blah, blah. And oh, let's get this over with now, you know, that person would not have gotten it. It had to be a real transition to become the person, you know. The message that I would give that person, and it wouldn't be entirely honest, would be more along the lines of what I was just talking about with the kids. You know, your life's going to be very different, but it's going to be meaningful in ways that you don't understand now. And, you know, the only way you can do that is to live it. You just have to live it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One day at a time, William.
One day at a time.
Yeah. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Thank you so much. Let's see, we probably have time for one more question or two more questions, maybe. I guess a librarian question I could ask is whether there's any books or movies that either resonated with your own experience of suicide or mental health, or that you would recommend to other people.
Oh,
yeah.
Any
We
books?
love to recommend books in the library.
Yeah, I remember you asked that earlier, and I gotta speak first because there's the book. Now it's pretty dark, but it's very real. It's called Darkness Visible by William Styrone. He's a famous writer of literature, American writer of literature. And Darkness Visible tells his story of his encounters with major depressive disorder. And it carried me through a lot of times when I was in a bad place, because I could read this guy's stuff and see that I wasn't alone. And it does end on a good note, but I carried that around in my Kepler's book bag forever. And I still have it right nearby right now. But that's one book that stands out to me.
Well, you kind of asked two questions, and, you know, what resonated? Leaving Las Vegas. Anybody seen that or read that? That resonated. In terms of books that would be helpful, you know, I don't know if you're allowed to have somewhat religious books, but I read a book called Sermon on the Mount by a guy named Emmett Fox, and it sounds very religious, but it actually is very much about using prayer and religious type behaviors in ways that they've been used that predate all of the current religions, basically as a way for human beings to manage their own thoughts and manage their minds. And it's very interesting because in a lot of ways, this book draws on the teachings of Jesus, obviously, because it's Sermon on the Mount. But a lot of people who have taken CBT say that the roots of CBT are in there because, you know, you're using prayer to try to counter the thought processes that start the problems that lead you to the bad places, and catching them early and heading them off. And, you know, and that's very much about like the CBT concept of automatic negative thoughts and trying to work through those. And yeah, and it's not very long.
Thank you. And we are at the top of the hour. I'm trying to respond to everyone's messages. But they're mostly, thanking both of our speakers, as I would also thanking both of our speakers for being here today, and thanking everyone who also joined us in the audience. And
please try and stick around and go to Real Talk. It's coming up right now.
oh
It's
yeah,
next time. I think it's an hour. So Pam will be there.
yeah, and
Alright.
I had put a link to that in the chat, I
Yes, it's
believe,
in the
but
chat.
I'll put that. Yeah, if you scroll up, you'll see Real Talk. It's above Star Vista. Just one second.
For those of you who want a double header.
Yeah. You're already, emotionally loosened up. You're ready for another.
Let's play two.
Great. Okay. And then I'm also going to put, so I'll put that again, and I'm going to put I think other people's chat is less confusing than mine at this point, but I will also put our feedback survey in the chat again.
And I just want to thank everybody who came. I mean, the one thing we worry about is that no one's going to show up, but we had a very good audience today. It was great to see so many people here. And I just hope that we touched some hearts.
Yes. And also the evaluation is not just a matter of paperwork. It helps us know who we're speaking to and whose needs we can meet next. It's not just a bureaucratic thing. It's very helpful for us. So if you get a chance, please do the evaluation.
And yeah, this is such a wonderful program to give you an opportunity to talk about your experience and to give people the opportunity to ask questions in real time, even though we're not together in person. It's so powerful to get to hear your story and to ask questions of you as well. Thank you both so much for all of your work in the community.
And thank you so much, Fiona, for hosting this.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd be very happy to do it again. And we'll also put let's see. I'll put the hotline in the chat one more time too. But yeah, thank you again so much, everybody, for being here. And also, I'm going to send up a follow-up email too, because I know the chat is getting to be a lot. But there's so many other great events that are happening this month, Suicide Prevention Month, that John and or William have had a hand in organizing, or they're also going to be involved in. And of course, many other great speakers. So yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for being here today. I'm a little overwhelmed, but I just feel really, really grateful to get to connect with both of you and with Pam, and for everyone who was able to be here today. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Okay, thank you so much. Take care, everyone.